Chasing the Sun, author Ryan Boog, read by James A Greig. It is May 17th, 2026. Chasing the Sun, a novel based on a true story by Ryan Boog. Prologue. The afternoon, Grant Pass, Oregon, 1925. The smell of fresh-cut lumber climbs the stairwell from the hardware store on the ground floor. It mixes with something cleaner up here, fresh paper and ink, the smell of productivity. William Boog climbs the stairs slowly. He is 84 years old. The hair on his head has gone fully white. His suit has taken on a permanent shape from seasons of wear. In his right hand is his walking stick. His left hand grips the railing with the patience of a man who has learned not to argue with his own body. Paint still lives under the fingernails. The knuckles are swollen now. He reaches the landing and pauses. Not defeated, negotiating, he adjusts his collar, smooths his jacket. He blows up from his bottom lip, making his mustache wave a little. Then he opens the door. An oak desk sits near the window, a well-used typewriter and framed picture on its surface. Surrounding the desk are two leather chairs and bookshelves lined with legal volumes whose spines have cracked from use. A clock ticks on the wall through the window behind the desk. The Siskiyou Mountains hold their green line against the pale afternoon sky. The attorney, Hollis, stands to greet him. He's in his 40s. His handshake is firm but not competitive. Mr. Boog, thank you for coming in. Please. He begins, gesturing to one of the empty chairs. William stows his hat and coat and takes a seat. His eyes move across the room in a quick sweep. He has read every room he has entered since he was a boy. Hollis opens an oak filing cabinet positioned behind his desk. William glances at the folders already inside, dozens of them. He is not the first man to sit in this chair and put his name to the final document. Hollis pulls out a folder with empty forms and paper and sets it neatly on his desk. You hired me for this entire afternoon, Hollis says, settling into his chair and opening a leather folder. So, let's take our time. Let's get this will done properly. I'll ask you some questions, get to know you, and write some notes. Once I have what I think we need, we will type out your official will, signed and witnessed. I appreciate that. William's voice is lower than it was in his younger years. It still carries the ghost of a Dublin accent that 60 years in America has not fully erased. The vowels are American now, the consonants still belong to Ireland. His R's roll slightly. Hollis uncaps his pen, writes the date at the top of the fresh page. He glances at the name on his appointment ledger. Boog. He looks up. That's an unusual name. If you don't mind my saying, I've lived in this valley for 15 years and I don't think I've come across it before. Where does it come from? William's thumb traces his knee, a slow rotation. It doesn't come from anywhere. That's the honest answer. My mother chose the name William. Nobody handed her a family Bible with Boog written on the front. No grandfather passed it down over a Sunday dinner. It came from a Scottish father that I never knew, except I heard it spelled it differently. Boog. B-O-A-G, from what I was told. I was raised by distant cousins, but they spelled it Boog. B-O-O-G. Hollis watches him. The old man's voice stays level. No hesitation. No weight on any particular word. Well, Hollis says, a will is a document that carries a name forward. That's the whole point of it. Your name, your property, your wishes, set down so it outlasts you. He pauses. Before we get to the assets and beneficiaries, I find it helps to know a little about the man whose name goes at the top. Tell me about yourself, Mr. Boog. Where did you come from? William is quiet. He has talked to many people in his life, but doesn't talk about his past. He should have expected this question. The words are there, he just hasn't said them out loud in a long time. His hand goes to his breast pocket. Inside is a piece of paper, folded once down the middle, carried so long the creases has nearly worn through. Hollis does not know about this paper. He will, before the afternoon is done. I was born in tenement on Stephen Street in Dublin, William says, November of 1841. My mother was on her own. She was young. The tenements had a way of making age difficult to judge. He pauses. His eyes have left Hollis and moved to the window, to the mountains, to somewhere far past the mountains. She chose my Catholic name herself, weeks before I arrived. I don't know why she picked William. Hollis has stopped writing. His pen rests on the page. William is quiet for a moment. He looks down at his hands in his lap, turns them over once, slowly as if checking whether they still belong to him. It was no place to raise a child, he says, but she did it anyway. He stops there, not because he is finished, because he is deciding how far back to go. Hollis waits. The clock ticks. Through the window, a cloud moves across the sun, and the light on the desk dims and returns. Outside, the weather is turning. A fall shower has crept into the valley. Rain taps the gutters of a G Street and finds the drain pipe at the hardware store below. A soft, steady drip against stone. William hears it. His eyes close. Part 1. The Dublin Grit, 1841 to 1873. Chapter 1. Raw, furious, and unmistakably alive. The water found its way through everything in the tenements. It dripped from the roof, pooled in the stairwells, followed the cracks in the walls. The mortar and the plaster felt like it hadn't been dry since the building went up. November 12, 1841. A woman screamed on the upper floor of the tenement house. The shoe brokers on the street below paused. The furniture maker across the way glanced up. Water dripped from a windowsill onto cobblestones and caught a sliver of the sun. Below the roof lines, the tenements sprawled in every direction. This was Dublin's oldest and poorest quarter. This world was a labyrinth of narrower lanes speckled with washing lines and wooden carts. People spilled onto the streets to take part in life. Coal smoke hung in a gray haze that never quite lifted. Shoe brokers called out prices from doorways, and furniture maker hunched over a chair or frame in the window, his mouth full of tracts. When a horse passed along the street, children ran to it before anyone could stop them. Through a cracked window in the upper floor of a tenement house, a single room 12 feet by 12 feet, 3 families shared this space. Divided by hanging blankets that stopped neither sound nor smell, the walls wept with the same damp that found its way through everything here. No separate bedrooms. The only furniture was a single table and a couple of stools. In the far corner of the room, a young woman lay on a straw mattress. Her age was unknown, but she was very young. Sweat beaded on her forehead, which made her dark hair stick to her face. Eyes squinting, 3 or 4 deep breaths, then a long grunt, again and again. A midwife knelt between her legs. Sleeves rolled past the elbow, hands ready. 2 other women from the room hovered nearby because there was nowhere else to go. The room was the room. Everything in it heard everything. The young woman screamed. The room went still. The shoe brokers on the street below paused mid-sentence. The furniture maker lifted his head from his work. Then a cry, raw, furious, and unmistakably alive. The midwife lifted the child, a boy. She wiped him with the gray rag that had done this duty before. The rag only did partial duty here. She placed him, still slick and screaming, on his mother's chest. The mother stared at her son with exhausted wonder. "A boy," the midwife said. "Strong lungs on him." The woman cradled him. She touched his face ever so gently. She couldn't say any words just yet, only sounds. She only said, "Oh," in a fragile, soft voice, which made the baby stop crying. He stared up at her with a focus that seemed intense for something just minutes old. His eyes darted around the room and settled on his mother. The midwife peeked out the window. She was looking for something she already knew was not there. "Has his father got a name for him?" The mother's expression slowed down. There was no father to speak of. There was no family name to carry forward. No tradition to honor. No grandfather, no uncle. She was on her own here. A single trip to Scotland for work, and she came back carrying more than she left with. She chose the name herself, weeks ago. It was the only thing she had to give him that was entirely hers. "William," she whispers. Just the name itself, solid, a common name that wouldn't stand out, safe. She pressed her lips to the crown of his head, and the boy blinked once. Dawn approached, and for one moment the tenement glowed, softly. Then a man in the next partition coughed hard, enough to shake the blanket divider. A dog barked somewhere below. People were yelling on the street again. The light on the wall thinned, dimmed, and was gone. Dublin reclaimed the room. Within 2 weeks, the mother confirmed she could not raise a child in the tenements alone. She had barely survived birth. Her body was weak. Her household, no place for a child. There was no privacy. Everybody knew everybody's business. The fighting, the sex, the drinking, the abuse. She woke each morning next to 4 other people on the same mattress. The coat she used for a blanket lay over William on the floor. She packed up William and headed out to visit James and Mary. James and Mary Boog were the family who had recommended she visit their distant cousins in Scotland. The arrangement had already been made. This was the day. James was willing to take in a child his distant cousin had sired. The mother handed the baby over in a quick, cold manner. "I don't have much time for him. I'd like to keep the coat. Keeps me warm." The mother looked down at the ground and handed William over. Mary brought him close to keep him warm. "We'll raise him as our own. Your secret is safe with us. Thank you." The boy's mother stood at a moment longer, her arms empty now, then turned back toward the tenement without looking at the child again. Her footsteps faded on the cobbles. James and Mary went into their houses on Stephen Street. The house was in rough shape and a lot of people lived there. It was more civil than where Williams had just come from, albeit just as poor. Mary carried the boy up the stairs. He had stopped crying. His eyes moved over the stained walls, the cracked ceiling, the narrow landing where a neighbor's washing hung on a line. He did not know any of these things were poor. He did not know anything yet. Outside, rain began. Across the city, in the locked gardens of St. Stephen's Green, the ornamental trees dripped quietly behind their iron railings. 27 acres of green kept for the wealthy, visible from the tenement windows, but never touched. The boy would grow up seeing those gates and dreaming. Chapter 2. Early Independence. 8 years later, the street had not changed, but the people on it had. There were fewer of them. Upper Stephen Street in 1849 was quieter than it was when William was born. Boarded up shop fronts, gaps in the rows of houses where families used to be. The shoe brokers still called out prices, but their voices carried further now. There was less to compete with. William did not know what the word famine meant. He knew that the potatoes went black. He heard the older women in the tenement talk about it when he was small, their voices low against the walls. The potatoes were fine one season. The next season they turned to mush in the ground, and the smell came through the windows for weeks. He knew that people left. Whole families carried bundles down to Stephen Street toward the quays and did not come back. He knew that other families stayed and grew thinner until they stopped appearing at all. once saw a woman on the corner pulling back from a tree and putting it in a pot. "Ma, what is she doing?" Mary said nothing and pulled him by the arm on the other direction. He had seen the grain carts. He had watched soldiers march beside them with muskets on their shoulders while the carts rolled through streets where children sat hollow-eyed against the walls. William watched one cart pass, so close he could smell the oats inside. A boy younger than him reached for the tailgate, and a soldier kicked his hand away. William remembered the sound the boy's fingers made when against the wood. He remembered the green stain around the mouths of the children who had eaten grass because there was nothing else to eat. He passed the soup kitchen on Bow Lane once. The queue stretched around the corner and into the next street. By the following month, kitchens were shuttered and the queue was gone, and no one explained where the people had gone either. By 1849, the worst had passed, but William did not know this either. He only knew that the street was quieter than it used to be, and that the quiet had a weight to it. The tenements were filled with strangers from the countryside. Families arrived carrying nothing but themselves. They spoke in Irish that William could not follow. They packed into rooms that already held too many people. The building groaned with the weight. Sewage from the overflowing privy in the yard ran across the courtyard where William played. He leaned to step around puddles without looking down. Bodies appeared on the roadside in the mornings. Skeletal children often were on the streets, all alone. He walked past them on his way through the streets. He did not look at the faces. William Boog walked down the middle of this mess. He was 8 years old. His clothes were too large and his shoes were splitting in the seams. He passed a group of boys his age sitting against the wall doing nothing. Their legs were pulled up by their chest. Their faces showed despair, cheekbones sticking out more than they should. They made the kind of faces of children waiting for soup make. William did not look their way. His legs kept moving past them before his eyes had finished looking. He stopped at a window. Inside, a furniture maker worked a piece of oak with hands that knew every angle of the chisel tip, how the grain worked, every trick of the wood might try back. He was old with a gray beard and blue eyes. He'd done this a million times, and his movements carried an unhurried precision. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He simply worked. The chair he was building took shape, one piece at a time, nothing out of place. William stood at the glass, transfixed. His breath fogged a small circle on the pane. His eyes tracked the old man's hands. The worn, wrinkled skin, the grip on the chisel, the angle of the mallet stroke. Shavings flying. Everything else on Stephen Street ceased to exist. There was only the glass, the workshop, and this old man. The furniture maker noticed him. Their eyes met through the window. The old man gave a barely perceptible nod, but William caught it. "You can look, boy. Looking is free." William watched for a long time. His fingers moved, unconsciously mimicking the old man's movements. He did not know he was doing it. The night the tenement room on Stephen Street was sparser than it was 8 years ago. One of the families had gone, left or died, a distinction blurred by the famine. The hanging blankets that divided the room were gone. The damp was the same. The smell was the same. Coal smoke and boiled cabbage. The room still held 5 souls, not including William, Mary, and James. 2 beds served all of them. The children slept crossways at the foot of one bed, with old coats thrown over them because blankets were scarce. Rats moved through the walls at night. They came up through the walls and floorboards when the building went quiet. William had felt them run across his leg in the dark and stopped flinching at the sensation months ago. The yard below shared a single privy between roughly 40 people. The pit overflowed regularly into the courtyard where the children played during the day. Families used slop buckets at night and emptied them out the window or down the stairwell come morning. The stench was permanent. It had soaked into every surface of the building and into the clothes of every person who sleeps here. A dispensary doctor visited the tenement once a week. He had hundreds of patients in the district alone. When a child died, he marked it in a ledger if someone asks him to. Most did not ask. William sat cross-legged on a thin mattress. In his lap was a scrap of newspaper, creased and softened from handling. He traced the letters with his fingers, attempting to sound them out. He had been to the school at Whitefriars a few times. Enough for the letters to stick. He was teaching himself the rest, piecing it together, learning the hard way. On his mattress was an empty spot, James and Mary's spot. His adopted parents were out of town, gone to secure more money and food. A folded blanket sat where they used to sleep, and the absence was as permanent as the damp in the walls. William did not look at it. He did not pause over it. He finished the page. His sister noticed and worked with him. She attempted to read to him. William tried to learn reading by reading the words upside down. When they were done, he folded the newspaper carefully, one of the few things he owned, and tucked it under the blanket. He lay down. He stared at the ceiling, counting specks and dings. He visualized the imperfections into a rough shape of a country he will never see drawn on a map. Outside, the sound of Dublin continued. A fiddle somewhere, the notes thin and wandering, a drunk singing a song that had no ending or meaning. The choppy clatter of a cart on cobblestone fading. The South Dublin slums didn't stop, even in a famine. William closed his eyes next to his sister. Chapter 3. Bird shit and block letters. The morning was gray and tasted of rain that had not yet arrived. William stood outside a proper bootmaker's workshop on Upper Stephen Street, with his hands in his pockets. He was 12 years old, taller than he was, but still lean from growing faster than food could follow. The year was 1853. The famine was officially over. The tenements had not received the news. The workshop belonged to a man named Doyle, 50s, thick-armed, with a leather apron so permanently stained and molded to his form that it had become part of his body. Through the workshop window, Doyle worked at his bench, cutting, shaping, pulling, threading through sole leather with the steady rhythm of a man who has done this every day for 30 years and expects to do it for 30 more. The smell of leather and oil drifted through the gap beneath the door. William had been standing there for what appeared to be a long time, long enough that his feet had gone numb against the cobblestone, long enough that the bread woman who passed every morning had passed twice and given him a look both times. Doyle glanced at him through the window. He ignored him and went back to work. William did not move. The rain arrived, not the soft apologetic drizzle the guidebooks will one day call mist, but proper Dublin rain, diagonal and persistent. William was soaked through in minutes. His shirt darkened, his hair plastered flat. Water ran down his face and dripped from his chin. He did not move. Doyle came to the door. He filled the frame, barrel-chested, square-jawed, and looked of a man who had been interrupted. "Are you thick in the head, boy?" "I want to learn." His voice held steadier than his age should have allowed. "Every boy out here wants something. What makes you different?" William reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of leather. It was crude but recognizable, an attempt at the top of the shoe. He hand-stitched it with thread and he had scavenged from God knows where. The stitching was uneven, the edges were rough, but there was purpose in it. William looked at a shoe, understood its construction, and tried to reproduce it with the scraps and willpower. Doyle took it, turned it over. His thick fingers followed the stitch line, testing the tension, feeling for where the boy got it right and where he didn't. He looked at William standing in the rain, and something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes that immediately corrected. "Get in here, boy." William stepped inside. The warmth of the workshop hit him first. He noticed the iron stove in the corner, the air thick with the smell of leather, beeswax, and turpentine. Then the quiet, the purposeful quiet of a place where things are made, a quiet that would turn into racket soon. Doyle held up a piece of leather and looked at William condescendingly. "Did you stitch this together, or did your mother help you?" "Mother doesn't know how to stitch leather. I did this on my own." William paused. His eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted to the leather in Doyle's hands. When he spoke again, his chin lifted in a fraction. "I stitched it together, found scraps in the trash and laying around. I watched you and others work on shoes and boots. I put my mind to it, and I've only slowly learned how to stitch." Doyle snorted. "I've seen better stitching in Northampton. Look at it. The stitching looks like bird shit. And how durable is it?" He gripped both sides of the leather and pulled. There was a short struggle, but the thread held for a moment, then ripped with a bunch of tiny pops. The pieces came apart in his hands. Doyle set the ruined experiment on the bench. "Someone's toes would be exposed in a month with this." William said nothing. He watched. "The English?" Doyle picked up a factory boot from the shelf behind him. The leather was already cracking and stitching was coming out. "They make shoes like this. Cheap to make. Make it fast. The customer comes back to quickly buy again and again. Us Irish?" He set the factory boot down and picked up one of his own. Hand-lasted, double-stitched, thick sole, the leather supple and dark with oil. "We make proper footwear. Something you can be proud of. Our name is on it, you know?" William nodded. Doyle looked at him for a long moment. The rain hammered the window. The stove ticked. "I can see you ain't going away. But I'm a busy man. Not much time to teach. You'll sweep. You'll carry. You'll do whatever I tell you. And you won't speak unless spoken to. And I don't pay." "I don't need pay. I need a trade." Doyle stared at him. Then he stepped inside. William grabbed a broom before the man had finished moving, a grin splitting his face wide open. The years in Doyle's workshop passed and revealed the rhythms of the craft. William swept, he carried, he did whatever Doyle told him, and he did not speak unless spoken to. But he watches. He watched still and watchful as a hawk on a fence post. This was second nature to him, patient, absorbing everything. He watched from the corner of his eye while sweeping, tracking Doyle's hands. Held the boot last while Doyle's shaped leather around it, his own hands sweating with concentration, willing them to learn what they are touching. Weeks passed. His hands became more steady and calm. He threaded a needle through sole leather with something approaching confidence. Doyle inspected the boot that William had made. He turned it over, ran his thumbs along the stitching, tested the heel seat with a press of his palm. He frowned, set it down. Doyle gave nothing easily, but this time he gave the smallest nod, a movement so slight it could be a twitch. William saw it and stood a little straighter. By 14, William worked alone at the bench. Doyle could finally relax. He sat in the back of the workshop, smoking a pipe, his legs stretched out, watching the boy who was no longer a boy work with steady hands. The pipe smoke curled toward the ceiling. Doyle said nothing because nothing needed to be said. William finished a pair of boots. He held one up to examine it, rotated it, examined the sole from below, the clean line of stitching, the way the leather wraps tightly without a single wrinkle. It's decent work. He knew it. The leather knew it. He allowed himself the faintest smile, a private thing, meant for no one. Back on Stevens Street, William and the family he was adopted into moved around to a few different buildings. They were all within a few blocks of each other. Every move felt like a new beginning, but always ended with the same result. No one in their tenements knew how to set roots. During the moves, Williams made the best of it by making new friends. His conversations with friends sparked a curiosity that didn't know he had. "Pa, I was talking with John Murphy. He was telling me that he gets to go across the ocean someday. I asked him why. He said it was in his name. He said Murphy meant sea warrior and that he was destined to it. I told him I could cross with him. He laughed at me." There was silence. William had been thinking about the question he was about to ask for quite a while. "I remember when Sister Mary was teasing me. She told me I was adopted. Then you and Ma told me that I was. Pa, what name was I born into?" "Lucky you're a kid. You were born into the name, our last name, in a queer way. You see, we have a lot of relatives in Scotland. Most of them go by Boog now. However, they have changed their spelling of their name often. It's been Boog, Boog. My father left Scotland and came here. I don't know why. I died when I was young. I figured, new place, new spelling, Boog. Where was I getting it at? Oh, the Scots. William, your father is a distant cousin of mine. He is a weaver in Perthshire. When all of this happened, it was clear he doesn't want you in his life. He has his own wife and kids. Your mother is from around here. Could be dead by now. She didn't want you either. We agreed to take you in, see? Your mother had joined a trip to Scotland to get materials to bring back here. Life got much harder for her after she came back here, pregnant with you. William was gutted. Neither parent wanted him. His own adopted parents were gone half the time. His sister was out on her own by now. The feeling of neglect and rejection pushed past a place of tears. No tears would find their way out. This gut punch turned into slow burn when William noticed the smell around him. Does he? William wanted to ask more. Then he thought to himself, if he doesn't want me in his life, why do I care about his? Never mind, Pa. Sounds like you can say whatever you want for this, but what does it mean to be a Boog, your name? Nothing. It means nothing. We're the only Boogs in Dublin, perhaps Ireland. Maybe it will mean famine survivor. Don't worry, kid. You have to look forward. Make the most of your situation. The year was 1859. William was 18 years old. He stood outside a modest stall, his own corner of Stephen Street. A rented nook barely wider than his shoulders, but in his hands, a small hand-painted sign, still wet. The letters were clean and square, painted in the careful block style of a man who had taught himself penmanship the same way he taught himself everything else, by refusing to stop. Boog, boots and shoes. He propped up the sign carefully and stepped back. Then he stepped forward again toward the sign. His fingertips touched the letters. The B was the bookend, nice and powerful. The two middle O's, they were almost like eyes staring back at him. The G, that curve and kick, a fine bookend as well. His name, on something permanent. Not scratched into dirt, not something scribbled in a church registry, not just a funny last name. This was a new name, a name painted in clean block letters on a sign. This name was now on a street where people will walk past and read it. But it's a name with no meaning. For William, it was the first time that Boog had existed on anything fixed in the physical world. There was no father sign to echo, no family shop front to inherit, no grandfather's trade card in a drawer. This was the first. William stood there a moment longer than the task required. He grunted a grunt of approval. The restlessness he had carried since birth went quiet. Born in a room divided by blankets, a name attached to nothing, now his name was on a thing that would not blow away. He dropped his hand and adjusted the sign a fraction of an inch, then went inside and began arranging his bench. Across the street, Doyle stood with his arms folded, watching. His face carried no expression that could be called pride. Doyle did not do pride, not in the way that showed. He stayed there longer than the task of watching required. Then he uncrossed his arms, turned to his own shop, and closed the door quietly behind him. Chapter 4, Dublin Sun. The lamplighters were out on Stephen Street. William closed up his stall after a long day. He was 18, almost 19. His hands were black with polish and his back was stiff from the bench. He walked the street at dusk. There was a quality to Dublin sunsets that belonged to no other city. It made you forget you were in the tenements. It was a respite from the hard day. The sun melted behind the horizon, and the gas lamps created small islands of warmth on the wet stone, each one a circle of gold in the gathering dark. William made his way to Michael's Lane to get leather. Next to the leather shop, he passed a wash house. Through the open door, steam billowed out in a great white cloud that smells of lye and boiled linen. Inside, women worked over tubs of scalding water. Their sleeves rolled past the elbow, faces flushed red from the heat. Their arms were bare and worn out from wringing. The air was thick enough to chew. One of them was Mary. She was 15, small, dark-haired. with hands already rough beyond her years and a way of carrying herself that is different from the resignation around her. She had a soft jawline, a delicate face, but her arms and shoulders tell a different story. The way she wrung out the sheets with more force than necessary, as though the sheet had personally wronged her. She caught William looking. She did not smile, she did not blush or drop her gaze or perform any of the small theater the moment might seem to demand. She just held his gaze, evenly, without coyness or challenge. "I see you seeing me." William opened his mouth to say something, then closed it. He was a young man who could charm a customer into a second pair of boots and talk his way past the landlord's suspicion. But this girl in the wash house steamed and rendered him briefly, completely useless. He nodded, an awkward, jerky motion, and kept walking. Mary watched him go. The faintest trace of amusement crossed her face. She went back to her sheet. What followed was not a courtship in any storybook sense. It was a series of small, clumsy collisions, spread across 2 years, each one brief, but when added up, they were enough to mean something. William walked past the wash house on Stephen Street, too casual. His stride was wrong, too slow, too measured. He looked like a man who was trying to look like he was not looking for someone. He shot the quickest glance of all time. Mary did not look up. He walked past again. She still did not look up. The sheet in her hands received an extra twist. Mary came around the corner with her arms full of mended clothes, moving fast, and collided with William on the footpath. They both stumbled. They both smiled. She had a crush. But the thought she was too young, and neither of them knew what to do with the gap between those two facts. They moved on in opposite directions, but curiosity was starting to win. One morning, a pair of small leather gloves appeared in the washhouse windowsill. They were well made, hand-stitched, the leather soft and carefully cut, size for a woman's hands. No note, Mary found them. When she came to work, she picked them up, turned them over, and looked up the street. He was already gone. Days later, she saw him on the street and waved him down. She held out the gloves. "These are yours," she says, and he says, "I don't think they'd fit me." And they both stand there a moment longer than the exchange requires, their eyes holding in a way that has nothing to do with gloves. By 1862, they walked together side by side, not touching. Through the back lanes behind Liberty's, neither spoke. The silence between them was not empty. It was the silence of two people who have discovered they did not need to fill the air to feel together. Their footsteps fell into rhythm on the cobblestone. The evening settled. Mary sat on a low wall at the end of Michael's Lane. William stood leaning against it at his post. He was talking and animated, gesturing with both hands as he described something grand. His eyes were wide and expressive. Whatever he was saying, he believed it more than a carpenter believing in plumb. Mary watched him, chin on her hand, her eyes bright with something sharper than affection. They stood together at the end of Michael's Lane as the sun went down. The sky over Dublin bled orange and pink above the rooftops, and the last of the light caught the cobblestone and turned them copper. "It's Moran, by the way. Mary Moran." "Moran? My pa told me that the Moran family." "I bet our parents know each other. My father is James Boog. I am William." "Boog?" Mary gave a puzzled smile. One corner of her mouth turned upward. "Yes. Has your family ever mentioned mine?" "We only mention what we need to survive. My sister was bit by a rat last week. You'd think the famine is over. We still see the effects of it." "Rumor has it we are headed for another famine." "Don't say such things. We were having such a pleasant walk. I read it in the paper. It's true." "Even if it's true, you can't control that, William." "I suppose you're right. But what are we supposed to be doing here, Mary? Bounce around from tenement room to tenement room? When the famine hits, we all share a biscuit, adding nothing to a name that means nothing?" "That's just life. That's how it goes." She shifts on the wall, pulls her shawl tight. "My grandpa Moran once told me to focus on good things and rely on the church. Good has always provided me, even when times are tough." William shoots her a look, mouth flat, eyebrows slightly raised. Nobody else is coming to save you or me, she continues, and there is a bravado in her voice now. In the meantime, I'll be here, and with my sister and brother, helping others when I can, mending and washing. It's just what I do. She pauses and gazes at him. And you seem to have found your footing. You're young for a bootmaker on his own, but you seem to be finding your way. Do you see yourself staying here? William turned toward the west, where the sun was dropping behind the rooftops. He pointed at it, a casual gesture, half joking, his figure aimed at the horizon. You see that? I'm going to follow that someday, all the way to wherever it goes. It goes down, William. Mary's voice is bone dry. It goes down every night and comes back every morning. That's what it does. Aye, but that's just Dublin, son. I want to see where it goes at night. The one at the edge of the world. She looked at him. Her expression softened. Her hand rose and almost touched his arm, the fingers reaching, then stopping, then curling back into her lap. That makes no sense. And what do you find it when you find it? I'll send for you. She shook her head, but she was smiling. She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time they had touched. His palm was rough with calluses and marks, knife scars, the map of a trade learned young. Her hand was rough too, cracked from the lye and boiling water. For a moment the two of them stand there at the end of Michael's Lane with the sunset dying over Dublin. Two pairs of working hands clasped together. Neither one let go. Two years passed. The walks continued, from Michael's Lane to the canal, from the canal to the quays, and back. Through every season Dublin offers, which is mainly rain with occasional concessions. By the winter of 1863, it was understood in the Liberties that William Boog and Mary Moran were a pair. In the spring of 1864, William walked to St. Michael's Lane and asked her to spend the rest of his life with him. There was no well-thought-out plan, no ring. They were standing in the doorway of a tenement where she lives with her sisters, and she said yes before he finished the question. The wedding took place at a church of St. Michael and John's, the same stone walls where William was baptized as an infant, the same narrow stained glass windows. The faint smell of incense lingered, refusing to leave. The church was nearly empty on William's side of the aisle. No family to fill the pews, no mother, no father, no uncle, no cousin. Not even Doyle on Mary's side, a handful of women from the wash house, and a few family members. Their faces were scrubbed, and the women had their best shawls on. They sat with the quiet solidarity of women who knew that showing up was the gift. William stood at the altar in one good shirt, scrubbed clean, hair combed flat with water. He was 23. For him, the church was a formality. He loved Mary, but had never been fond of the institutions, the Latin, the incense, the promises extracted in exchange for blessings he was not sure he needed. Why would a loving God give him such hardships early on in life? He felt abandoned, and the church didn't help. The boots he was wearing were his own work. They were the best pair he had ever made, save for this day, the leather oiled to a deep chestnut shine. He stood the way he always stood, upright, certain, but with that restless quality in his eyes that said he was already thinking about what comes next. Mary walked up the aisle steadily. Her father, Joseph, was there to give her away. She wore a simple dress, nothing white, nothing new, but she had done something with her hair, pinned it in a way that changed the shape of her face, and there was a small sprig of wildflowers on her collar. Not roses, not lilies, the scrappy, stubborn kind that grows between the cobblestones and Stephen Street. She chose them herself. The priest performed the ceremony. It was brief and unremarkable. Two poor young people in a mostly empty church making promises that the city of Dublin had no reason to believe they can keep. The priest had done this 100 times. His voice carried the flattened cadence of repetition. To him, this was Tuesday. But William's hands were steady when he took Mary's. His eyes did not wander to the door or the window. He did not tear up at the sentiment. He was entirely present, a rare thing for a man who was always calculating, always measuring the next move. For once, she had him in his tracks. Do you, William, take Mary to be your lawful wedded wife? I do. And do you, Mary, the William, to be your lawful wedded husband? Mary looked at him. Her eyes moved over his face, scrutinizing the little details. She rarely got to see William sit still and focus on her. Her stomach tightened. I do. The priest blessed them. No music, no reception, no rings. They could not afford them. William took Mary's hands and held them in the same way a craftsman held his tools, firmly, carefully, knowing what they were worth. They walked out of St. Michael and John's into the street. Dublin did not notice. A cart rattled past. A dog barked. A woman emptied a chamber pot from a window above, and the liquid arced through the gray air and splashed on the stones. The world was unchanged by the fact that William and Mary Boog now exist. They walked in opposite directions. Mary back to her tenement on St. Michael's Lane. William went back to his room in Stephen Street. They were married, but they could not yet afford to live together. The distance between their two doors was less than a quarter mile, and it might have well been the Atlantic. Chapter 5, Number 7. The year was 1865. The tenements were behind them, the narrow lanes, the hanging blankets, the damp and the dark. They walked north to the quay. The river Liffey pushed gently through the center of Dublin. Along its banks, the great department store rose. The buildings Dubliners call the monster houses. Their interiors lit by gas and stocked with goods from every corner of the empire. Horse-drawn carriages thundered past. The quay hummed with commerce, ambition, and the energy of too many people wanting too many things in too small of a space. William and Mary walked through his world like immigrants in their own city. Mary carried a bundle of their belongings, everything they owned wrapped in cloth. William carried a toolbox in one hand and the weight of determination in the other. His eyes were wide. Mary was visibly pregnant, her dress straining at the waist. She walked with a careful, flat-footed gait of a woman whose center of gravity had shifted. It was their first home together. William stopped in front of a narrow shop front, wedged between an iron worker and a tea warehouse. The number 7 was painted above the lintel in a faded white. The window was dirty. The door hung crooked on one hinge, its bottom edge scraping the stone. A faded "To Let" sign curled in the glass. William looked at Mary. She looked at the shop. She looked at him. This is it then? Number 7, Aston's Quay? Our first place together is here? This is it. They surveyed the grime, the filthy glass, the crooked door, the black mold creeping along the lintel. It's filthy. It'll clean up. The door's broken. I'll fix it. A long silence. Mary looked at the quay, the carriages, the noise, the sheer scale of commerce roaring past their tiny, broken shopfront. I don't know. The tenements cost us next to nothing. It's what we know. We understand how things work there. It's just busy up here. It's such a change. It feels as though we don't belong. I just feel... Hey! William grins wide and sudden. You've got a husband now. Let him lead you a bit, would you? The hint of a smile cracked Mary's expressions. Well, fix the door first. I'm not having our first customer think we live in a barn. And what's the harm in a barn? In you go, little lamb. Enough of that. Besides, we can't just walk in uninvited. Who owns this place? Some guy named Joseph. He's out of town by now, but I already gave him the first month's rent, so we have no choice. We're staying in this barn. He smiled again. We live upstairs, shop is downstairs. I'll grab my shop supplies and make my sign and lay out my things down here. I'm a simple man. Just throw my stuff upstairs and I can sort it out later. I'm well ahead of you. And I'll see those foul garments of yours. They smell something terrible. She pauses, narrows her eyes. Wait a moment. Perhaps you do live in a barn. That would explain the smell. She was laughing now. William laughed with her. They pushed each other on the footpath like children, jostling and nudging. Her hand found his chest. His arm caught her waist. Their faces drew near until they were a breath apart. They transformed the space. William adjusted the crooked door, rehung it on the new hinges until it swings true. Mary scrubbed the floors on her hands and knees, her pregnant belly pressing against her dress, her arms working in the same relentless rhythm that wrung sheets in the wash house on Stevens Street. William built a workbench from scavenged wood, scraps from the iron worker next door, a plank salvaged from a broken cart on the quay. He measured with makeshift ruler, a small plank with hand-cut notches in it. He cut it with the saw that needed sharpening. He fit the joints with the same patience Doyle taught him, testing each one with his thumb before he slams the nail. He painted a new sign, clean block letters on fresh board. W. Boog, bootmaker. He carried it outside and hung it above the door of number 7, Aston's Quay, and then he stepped back and looked at it. He'd done this before. The sign hung straight, his name, in full, above a proper door on a proper street. Not a stall on Stevens Street, not a corner borrowed from Doyle. His. He reached up and pressed his palm flat against the painted letters. The paint was dry. The wood was solid. A slight grin shows as he knows he isn't done yet. He touched the sign for a moment and started. Good to go. Time to get to work. The shop opened. William stood at the counter in a clean shirt, his bench stocked, his tools laid out with precision of surgeon's tray. His first customer was a dock worker, with cracked boots and the apologetic expression of a man who knows he has waited too long. William shook his hand warmly, examined the boots, turned them over, tested the sole with his thumb. William was bold like Doyle with his customers, but always found the silver lining with them. Through the window, the quay bustled past. Carriages, walkers, the constant traffic of a city in motion. Inside the shop, William worked in quiet focus. The only sounds were the pull of the thread through the leather, the tap of a hammer, the scrape of a knife edge. He had built an island of calm craft in the middle of Dublin commerce, and the river of people flowed past, and the island held. Months passed. The shop filled. A few pairs of finished boots lined a shelf. They didn't last long. A gentleman customer examined a pair and ran his fingers against the stitching. 40s, well-dressed, with the skeptical eye of a man who had been cheated before. And these will last through a winter? Sir, those boots will last through 3 winters, and by then you'll come back not because they've worn out, but because you'll want a second pair for the summer. The gentleman laughed despite himself. He reached for his money. William read people the way he judged leather, by touch, by instinct, by the quality of the grain. He knew when to push and when to step back, when to joke and when to be serious, when to let the work speak and when to speak for it. A society woman wanted boots for her husband, and William convinced her that her husband did not know what he wanted until William told him. A skeptical merchant doubted the price of the custom soles, and William explained the difference between the cost of a sole and the cost of an inconvenience and the way people perceive you. He made a child laugh while fitting his first pair of shoes on, and the child's mother ordered a pair for herself before they left. On the quay, this skill made money. Golden hour. The sun danced on the river Liffey. It turned to hammered copper into the late afternoon. The department stores cast long shadows across the water. The carriages were thinning as the day winds down, the thunder of hooves softening to an occasional clatter. William stood outside the shop, rolling down the sleeves after a long day. His back ached. He flexed his fingers, opened and closed, working the stiffness out. Mary came out and stood beside him. She was further along in her pregnancy now, large enough that she moved with his hand bracing the small of her back. She leaned against his shoulder because she was tired and he was solid and the day had been long. They watched the sun descend over the rooftops toward the mouth of the Liffey, toward the sea, toward the west. The light turned the river to gold and then to something deeper, a color that had no name but existed only in this city at this hour. "I don't think I've found you just yet," William said, quiet and almost himself. His eyes were on the western sky. Mary looked at him. "Who are you talking to?" "I'm not sure." She shook her head softly and took his arm. They went back inside. William paused at the door. The shop was dim now, the leather and oil smell thickening and the cooling air. He looked at his bench, his tools, the boots lined up along the wall, all of his. None of it enough. I think we'll do one more. Cheers, everybody. Today's beverage is brought to you by Ryan Boog. Thank you, Ryan Boog. You didn't have to leave me a beer, but it's much appreciated. Chapter 6, The Smallest Mark. The room above the shop was sparse but clean. Mary's influence, a candle burned on the small table by the window, its flame steady in the still air. In a wooden cradle, a baby slept, George, their firstborn. His face was red and wrinkled, his fist clenched even in sleep, as though he had arrived and the world braced for argument. William sat beside the cradle, doing something he had not done before. He was still. His hand rested on the cradle's edge, rocking it gently with a motion so slightly the cradle barely moves. His face showed something unguarded, barely visible, gone if you blinked. Mary watched from the bed. William Boog, not moving, not planning, not calculating foot traffic or measuring shop fronts, just sitting beside a cradle in candlelight, rocking his son, and the restlessness that drove him had gone quiet, and what was left was a man in a room with his child. After a long moment, William rose. He moved to the table by the window and sat. From a drawer, he took out a single piece of paper, clean, unlined, good enough for a letter. He had spent money on this. He folded it once down the middle, pressing the crease sharp with his thumbnail. He took his time with the crease, then admired the blank paper for a brief moment. Then he opened it, flat. On the left half, at the top, he wrote in careful letters, Mary. Below her name, he wrote, George. I think my kids went out to play, and now they came back. We'll just edit this out in post. All right, you guys. He looked at what he had written. 2 names. His whole world on one side of the folded piece of paper. The ink was dark and clean on the pale surface. The letters were steady. Not the letters of a man with uncertain hands, but of a man who understands that what he was writing mattered more than any sign or invoice or advertisement he will ever compose. He folded the paper along the crease, tucked it into his breast pocket, returned to the cradle. This was a new job for him. Mary watched from the bed. She did not ask what he had written. She did not need to. George grew. A week became a month became several. The red wrinkled face smoothed and filled. His eyes settled into a steady dark brown, and they tracked William across the room whenever William came up the stairs from the shop. George was exploratory. His fingers found things: Mary's collar, the edge of the cradle, William's thumb, which George gripped with a weakness that reminded him that Dublin didn't give out any favors. William came upstairs one evening and found George on his stomach on the floor, chin up, arms pushing against the boards. Mary sat nearby, mending. He's been doing that all afternoon, lifting himself up and looking about. William knelt. George's eyes got a bit wider. His arms shook. He looked at his father, and his mouth opened into a wet, toothless shape that was not quite a smile and not quite a word. A sound came out, a single note, high and sharp, aimed at William as if he were supposed to understand it. "He's talking to you," Mary said. "Maybe he's asking if he's old enough to help me in the shop." "He will one day." By autumn, George pulled himself up on the leg of a chair. His fingers whitened on the wool, his legs trembled beneath him, and his whole body swayed, but he held. William watched from the doorway with his leather apron on and said nothing. George looked back at him, standing, unsteady, triumphant, for 3 full seconds before his legs gave and he sat down hard. He did not cry. He reached for the chair leg again. William came downstairs. Mary was wiping the counter. "He stood up." "I know. He's been trying that all week." "You didn't tell me." "I wanted you to see it yourself." Winter came. George crawled fast across the floor, fast enough to reach the stairs before Mary could catch him. William built a gate from scrap wood, 2 short boards nailed across the top of the stairwell. George rattled it with both hands and howled at the obstruction. He had opinions. His voice carried through the floorboards and into the shop below, and customers looked up at the ceiling and smiled, and William pretended not to notice. In the evenings, William rocked the boy, not in the cradle anymore. George was getting too big for the cradle. William held him in his arms in the chair by the window and rocked with his boot heel on the floor. A slow rhythm, heel down, heel up, and George's eyes would drop and close, and his breathing would shallow, and his body would soften against William's chest. William rocked long after the boy was asleep. Mary watched and said nothing. In March, George was developing new abilities and new sicknesses. He had developed a cough, a small sound, dry, nothing to mark it. George fussed and coughed, and Mary held him, and it passed. Every child in Dublin seemed to have had a cough that winter. The damp came up through the floors, and the wind off the Liffey carried whatever the river carried, and children coughed, and the coughing stopped, and nobody gave it further thought. George's cough did not stop. Within a week, it deepened from wet to raspy to dry, then back to the other way. The dry bark became something thicker, wetter, and the sound that started in his belly and worked its way up through his chest. He coughed in fits, 3, 4 coughs in a row, each one pulling him forward so his small body curled around itself. Then silence. Then the breath in. The breath in was the sound, exaggerated, a high, thin whistle on the inhale that came from the narrowest part of his throat. It did not sound like breathing. It sounded like air forced through a space too small to admit it. Mary held him through the fits. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and George against her chest, and when the coughing started, she pressed him close and braced. His body convulsed with each cough, his face reddening, his eyes wide and wet and terrified. The inhale between the fits was the worst. The silence before it lasted 1 second, sometimes 2, and in the silence the room held its breath with him. Then the breath, then the coughing again. William heard it through the floor. He was at his bench. A customer was talking. The sound came through the boards, muffled, rhythmic. The cough, and then the silence, and then the high, thin whistle of the inhale. William's hand stopped. The customer kept talking. William stared at the ceiling. "Apologies. My son is unwell." He closed the shop early. He went upstairs. George was in Mary's arms, limb between fits, his face blotched red and white. The fit started again, and the boy's body seized, every muscle contracting at once. His back arcing, his mouth open, a rope of saliva hanging from his lip. The sound filled the room. William stood in the doorway and could not move. "He needs a doctor," Mary said. Her voice was level. Her arms were shaking. William went from the dispensary doctor. The man came in the afternoon, climbed the stairs without hurrying, listened to George's chest through a wooden tube, and stood back. "Whoop and cough. Pertussis. Keep him from upright during the fits. Steam from boiled water can help for the breathing. Feed him what he'll take. There's nothing else to be done." "How long?" "Weeks, sometimes longer. The fever will tell you which way it's going." The doctor left. His footsteps on the stairs were steady, unhurried. He had other houses to visit, other coughs to listen to. The days that followed had a terrible sameness. George coughed. The struggling inhale, he vomited from the force of the coughing. Mary cleaned it and held him, waiting for the next fit. The fits came in waves, sometimes minutes apart, sometimes an hour. The silence between them was not silence. It was a held breath, a room suspended, waiting for the sound to return. It always returned. William boiled water on the stove and held George near the steam. The boy's breathing eased for a moment, the wheezing softening, his eyes half closing. Then the cough came back and the easing was gone. William tried again, boiling more water, held him close to the pot. Mary pulled him back. "Not so close, you'll burn him." He breathed easier near the steam. "Not so close." Night was the worst. The coughing came faster in the dark. George's small body worked through fits that left him gasping, spent, unable to cry. The whoop on the inhale grew louder. It carried through the walls, a number 7, and in the shop below and out in the street. A neighbor knocked once to ask if the child was all right. Mary answered the door with George on her shoulder, his face pressed against her neck, his breathing rapid and shallow. She said, "I don't know." She closed the door. George's face changed. The redness became a darker shade, a bruised color around his mouth and his eyes that did not go away between fits. His lips turned to the color of a mussel shell. He stopped reaching for things. His hands lay open at his sides, palms up, fingers curled slightly, and he stared at the ceiling with the flat, exhausted gaze of someone much older. William and Mary both loved the feel of his warmth during snuggles, but George's warmth now was becoming a warning sign. On the 9th night, the fits slowed. Not because George was getting better, because his body was running out of the strength to cough. The inhale grew thinner, higher, and the sound that barely had enough air behind it to make itself heard. Mary held against her chest and could feel his ribs working, each breath a separate effort, a deliberate mechanical act that a body this small should not have to think about. William knelt beside them on the floor. He put his hand on George's back. George was shirtless at this time, his ribs exposed, his breathing irregular. Another fit, but this time almost a minute had passed before he got a breath. "Mary." "I know." She was reckoning. She was rocking, not for George. George was past being soothed by rocking. She rocked because her body had been doing it for days and did not know how to stop. The last sound George made was a breath in, with his eyes closed, one final high, thin inhale, the sound of air being pulled through a passage almost fully closed, a weak whistle, then nothing. The silence that followed was different from the silence between fits. The silence held the promise of the next breath. This one held nothing. Mary's rocking stopped. William felt the ribs go still under his hand. He did not move his hand. He left it there, on his son's back, on the small cage of the bone that had worked so hard for so many days and now had stopped. The Liffey flowed outside. A cart passed. A voice called to another voice, and the second voice laughed, and the laughter faded down the quay. A dispensary doctor came the next morning. He climbed the stairs without rushing and stood in the doorway for barely a minute. He looked at the cradle. He did not touch the child. He had seen this hundreds of times in the parish alone, and his face carried the flat expression of a man whom infant death held no power to surprise. "How old?" 11 months, William said. The doctor nodded. He wrote down, William Boog, 11 months. He recommended to William and Mary that George be buried at Glasnevin. That is where the poor buried their young. He turned and left, and his footsteps faded on the stairs without slowing. William carried the boy down the stairs before dawn. The stairwell was cold, colder than room above, and the stone walls held a chill that pressed through his shirt and into his arms where he held the small body. Mary followed. A neighbor had found a small white box from a coffin maker on Francis Street. William did not ask how much it cost. He did not want to know what charity felt like on a morning like this. William had made an arrangement for a horse and carriage to take him and his little pine box to Glasnevin, a 45-minute horse carriage ride. "You can sit up here," the carriage driver suggested. William did not reply. He sat next to the box in the carriage. His calloused hands that were always busy moving now sat still. his left hand pressed on the pine box. They made their way over the bridge, past the Liffey and north. William had seen this sight many times, a coffin being pulled around town on carriage. He never expected he would be a passenger. Nobody offered sympathy. In fact, nobody looked at him. William was stuck with the thoughts and the persistent bumps in the ride. At last, the high walls of Glasnevin appeared, the iron gates standing open under the gray Irish sky. The father tightened his grip on the little coffin as the cart slowed. He would hand his son over to the gravediggers soon, and then the long walk back alone. They buried George in a churchyard plot that held no stone marker. The earth was soft from rain, which was easy work for the gravediggers. William stood over the hole with one hand over his mouth. He didn't cry. He was in disbelief. A priest said a few words that William made an effort to not remember afterward. The paperwork was minimal. Only Glasnevin knew of George's birth and death dates. For William, George existed on one document only, a folded piece of paper in his father's breast pocket. Later, Mary had fallen into exhausted sleep. William sat at the table. He took the paper from his breast pocket, unfolded it along the crease. The paper was warm from his body, slightly soft at the fold. The crease opened with a faint resistance, the fibers already learning the shape they would hold for decades. There were the two names, Mary at the top, George beneath. He picked up the pen. His hand hovered over his son's name. The nib trembled, a single bead of ink ready to go. A long pause, Mary's breathing slow and deep, the candle fluttering. Then slowly he draws a small X after the word George. Mary, and below it, George, X. One stroke and then another. Crossing, and his firstborn son was accounted for. He folded the paper and put it back. He put his hand flat over it and held it there against his chest, pressing down. Months passed. The grief did not disappear. It got incorporated, folded into their life. William stood outside number 7 one morning, but he was not looking at his own shop. He was looking one door down, at number 6, a slightly wider storefront with a proper display window and better signage above the door. A "To Let" sign had appeared in its window. He watched the foot traffic. He counted under his breath. His eyes moved between his door and the one next to it. That evening, he sat at the table upstairs. Mary mended his shirt across from him. "Have you seen number 6 next door?" "I've seen it." "The front window is twice the size of ours. You could display 6, maybe 8 pairs of boots in that window. People walking the bridge would see them before they even reached the door. And the signage? Mary, there's proper space above that door for a real sign. Not this little board I've got nailed up. A proper painted sign that says something." "We've been here barely 2 years, William." "A year and a half, and the storefront was the problem. I'm losing customers because they walk right past number 7 without a second look. Number 6 has a better front, a better window, and the landlord saw to the upkeep. It's right next door, Mary. We'd barely have to carry anything." Mary sat down, her mending. She gave him a look, a level look, the look she reserved for moments when his ambition was outrunning his sense. "It's next door, William?" "Exactly. We could practically throw over things from one door to the other." "Don't you dare throw my curtains." "I'll carry them like a baby, both hands." Mary was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, lower, thinner. "I also wouldn't mind leaving this room. Every time I look at that corner." She did not finish. William's grin faded. He reached across the table and took her hand. George was in every shadow of number 7, the space where the cradle stood, in the silence that lives in the corner where the baby should be making noise. A fresh start, then. Right next door. Mary nodded. She picked up her mending again, but she was smiling, small, private, relieved. Number 6. The storefront was broader, the display window proper, and the landlord kept building a good repair. William arranged his best pairs of boots in that window, angled to catch the light. Without clutter, the sign hung above a proper door twice the size of the old one. W. Boog, bootmaker. Through the display window, the old number 7 was visible one door down. Already, relet to an iron worker's assistant. William had moved one door to the left and called it progress. The display window worked. Customers stopped. They looked. They came in. Austin arrived in 1868. William touched the child's hand, one finger against the impossibly small fingers, and his eyes carried George, but his face carried hope. Mary watched him hold Austin for the first time and could see him fighting the fear that this one might be taken too. The night he unfolded the paper on the table, wrote Austin beneath George X. The ink was fresh, the X above it was dry. Mary Margaret was born in 1869. The room upstairs was getting smaller, but louder, warmer. Austin toddled around in unsteady legs while Mary nursed the new baby. William came up from the shop covered in leather dust, scooped Austin up, and spun him until the boy shrieked. Mary rolled her eyes, but she was beaming. Letitia arrived in 1870, named for William's adopted sister's middle name, the only piece of her he can carry forward. 3 children under 3. Mary managed the chaos with the quiet efficiency of a field general, moving through the cramped room in choreography of nappies, feeding, soothing, and the occasional sharp word that stops a toddler in its tracks. The paper grew. Mary at the top. George X. Austin. Mary. Letitia. A family taking shape in ink beneath a name that starts with the love and carries death. The room upstairs had become a battlefield. 3 children were asleep in various configurations. Austin lay sideways on the mattress, arms flung wide. Mary Margaret had kicked her blanket off. Letitia, the newest, slept in a drawer that serves as a makeshift cradle, her tiny fists clenched above the folded dishcloth that passes for a pillow. William sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. Mary folded laundry on the only square foot of floor that was not occupied by a child or a piece of furniture. I stepped on Austin's hand this morning. I know. I heard him from downstairs. There's no room, Mary. I can't get from the bed to the door without stepping over 2 children. Austin sleeps with his arms out like he thinks he's a bird. And the laundry. I've got nappies drying over my workbench. A customer watched me pull a nappy off a pair of boots yesterday. Where else am I supposed to dry them? The room is what it is. That's exactly my point. The room is what it is. And what it is too small for 5 of us. 6 counting the next one. Mary's hands paused on the laundry. She looked at him. Next one? I'm just saying. At the rate we're going. At the rate you're going. You put that on both of us. William was quiet. Mary knew this silence. The loaded silence of William Boog working up to something. She stopped, folding. Oh no, William. Number 13. You cannot be serious. Listen to me. He leaned forward, animated, his hands already describing the shape of the thing he has been building in his head for weeks. Number 13 is the corner unit, right at the foot of the O'Connell Bridge. Every single person who crosses that bridge walks past number 13. I've counted them. Mary, I stood outside and counted between 2 and 4 o'clock. More people passed the counter than passed this shop in an entire day. You've been standing on the street counting people? For 3 weeks. 3 weeks? And the room above, a bigger, proper room. Mary, you'd have space to breathe. The children would have space to crawl around without ending up under my workbench. And then rent. Yes, it's more, but the foot traffic will be more than cover it. Number 13 is where the money is. I can feel it. Mary looked around the cramped room. Austin had rolled in onto Mary Margaret, who had not woken up because she was used to it. Letitia slept peacefully in her drawer. This will be our 3rd home on Aston's Quay. People will think we're running from something. We're not running from anything. We're running toward the corner with all the money. You're impossible. You know I don't like to change. I don't like this. I know. But you married me anyway. He smiled, that wide, certain, impossible smile. Fine, Mary says. But you're carrying every last thing. And this time, William Boog, if you so much as look at another shop front on this quay, I will nail your boots to the floor. He pulled her close. She let him, her face against his chest, her hands still holding the mending. He gave her a hard kiss on her hairline. You won't regret it, he said into her hair. I already regret it, she said, muffled against his chest. She knew this. She had always known this. She closed her eyes against his chest and held on. All right, this has been the first reading of Chasing the Sun, written by Ryan Boog, read by James A. Greig. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the next one.